all very welcome. My name is Aoife Traynor. I am the Executive Education Programme Manager here in TU Dublin, and on behalf of my graduate business school colleagues, I'd like to welcome you all to this Connect Ed event on unlocking sales opportunities and creating growth in circular economy. I know we have a number of our international selling programme and product management alumni with us, along with colleagues from Enterprise Ireland, our wider graduate business school alumni group, and TU Dublin colleagues and network. So for the next hour, we will be focusing on the subject of circular economy, what's going down the line, what are the realities, what needs to be navigated, and with this particular audience in mind, we'll discuss the opportunities that are there for your organizations to create growth and value for your business customers and stakeholders. Leading us through all of this is Mary Cronin from Upthink Innovation Agency, who I am delighted to introduce you all to. As the founder of Upthink Innovation Agency, Mary works with SMEs and large organizations to create strategies to develop circular and bio-based business models to generate growth. And Mary and I have had many conversations over the last few weeks and months, and she is absolutely an advocate of circularity and very passionate about the development of circular and bio-based economies. And I know she is keen to get some discussion going with you all after her presentation. Thank you to those who sent through questions in advance, and please feel free to add in your real-time questions into the chat box, and we'll get to them shortly. So without further delay, I will hand the floor over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Aoife, and thank you, Colin, for the invite. I'm delighted to be here and to talk about the circular economy and sales and growth opportunities. So we'll start with what is the circular economy, just a baseline of this. And 2.01 billion metric tons of solid waste is produced annually, and a third of this is not managed in an environmental sustainable way. Global waste will double over the next 10 years, and this is a lot of waste. So this is enough waste to fill over 13 million Olympic-sized swimming pools, just to put it into perspective. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We'll talk about circular economy, sustainability, the business drivers, the role of ICT, growth, technology, innovation, and across sectors. And we've some case studies as well. Before we get started, I just want to show you a short video.
We live in a world with finite materials.
We are throwing an awful lot of electronics,
plastic, food, carpets,
clothing
away. It's a waste of precious materials.
If we could build an economy that would use things rather than use them up, we could build a future that really could work in the long term.
You design the product in a way that
can be taken apart once the consumer has finished using them.
You remanufacture it and give it out again. You can reduce your production cost hugely if applied correctly.
Instead of garments ending up in landfill,
companies can repurpose it, reuse it, making profit out of their waste.
We take some resources from nature and bring it back in the form of nutrients.
It's very much a natural cycle.
We use 70% less water than conventional agricultural methods.
Our packaging is not a waste, it's something that you can consume and eat.
We redesign everyday products to make them fully recyclable.
We farm as close to nature as is possible.
The H&M Group has set ambitious targets to use 100% sustainably sourced materials.
There is a lot of conversation about not buying clothes, but different models where you can rent clothing.
We develop fully modular headphones that we offer on a subscription basis.
The circular economy itself is inevitable in my view.
It's not one fix, it's about the entire system being redesigned.
This is, to me, the only way to fight climate change, to fight pollution, to fight waste.
This is a business model that stacks up.
Global companies cannot survive in the future without transitioning towards a circular economy. That is a really exciting future.
Great. So that's just some background on the circular economy from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And that's the circular economy. I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about what's the linear economy. So 90% of business models currently being created, unfortunately, are linear, which means that we take resources from the ground, we make and produce product, we distribute that product, and unfortunately, it's consumed and all of that waste is going to landfill. The problem that we have now is that our landfills are full and we've extracted infinite amount of resources from the earth, and this is a problem. So when we talk about the circular economy, a circular economy is one that's restorative by design, and it's based on 3 principles, and I'll repeat these throughout the next while in the presentation. So really we're talking about designing out waste and pollution at the very beginning of our design cycle, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. Now we will, and I want you to think about this in the context of growth and opportunity from a sales aspect. So when we look at the circular economy and the circular bioeconomy, here on the left, this green line is what we know as the bioeconomy. And the bioeconomy is renewable biological resources from land, sea, and crops. What we're looking to do is move from fossil to bio-based. So move from fossil-based biorefining to bio-based. And how we do that is we take bio-based, we put it through anaerobic digestion or biorefineries, and we make renewables or byproducts. And we're always looking at what we can do with waste. Now that can be food waste, that can be electronics waste, or grass agri waste. Now I'm conscious that our audience is both in technology and from a food and a farmer background, so I will be touching on the different sectors. On the right hand side, this blue circle is what we call our technical sphere, and that's in around the opportunities, the challenges, and the risks relating to recovery and material choices. So how do we think about at the very beginning when we build a business model? How do we think about that in the life piece? So when we're designing Apple Mac or a fridge, or even indeed food products, how do we look at what will happen? Can we maintain that Apple? Can we maintain that fridge? Can we reuse? How do we disassemble it? And at the very outside here, you'll see the recycle circle. And that's the last thing we want to do, is to recycle. Really, when we're building a business model and we're thinking about end of life, we really want to keep our product or our service in use for as long as possible. So for example, that Apple Mac or that piece of technology or that server or that fridge. So key drivers and benefits. So the world population is growing. So by 2030, it will increase to 8.6 billion, and 2050, 9.8 billion. That means we'll be looking for more of those resources, more internet usage with that larger population. And that's a huge demand on resources that we don't have. Consumption is growing, culture is varying, and there's patterns of this waste. It's just some benefits from a growth aspect. So, for example, in raw material conservation, we're looking at, in construction, for example, we're looking at how we can conserve some materials, steel, water beams, and a lot of research and technology going into, and data-driven technology going into how we reduce water, when we're making plastics, how we reduce water when we're building data centers, how we reduce energy when we're making technology. We look at innovation in around all the wind turbines, all the engines, all the machine tools. Then we're always looking at durable products. So how do we create a product or design a service that lasts for quite a long time? And this is also a selling point that you'll have when you're selling this product. And consumers now are also looking for durable products. I don't know about you, but when I have products, or I'm looking to buy a product, for example, my Siemens fridge or my washing machine, I want Siemens to really own that washing machine. And I would like to lease that washing machine from Siemens and know that Siemens will take back the washing machine for me, service that washing machine, and disassemble it with all the materials that come with it. So that's a durable product, and we're not there yet, but we're getting there. In the circular economy, lots of new jobs. And the good news is not just urban jobs, a lot of rural jobs. When we're building biorefineries, we really build them in clusters and themes in around food clusters like in Denmark or in Germany, food clusters, energy clusters, and we're moving in that direction here in Ireland. So when we're selling that proposition, or you're selling your product, if whether you're a logistics company or you're a technology company, you're really selling the piece around clustering and the job benefits that it brings. In buildings and packaging, we're also looking at the whole efficiency piece around packaging. And in buildings, smart buildings, we're constructing buildings. In construction, we're looking at building modular buildings, smart device. So it's all IoT, it's all data driven. So when you're putting up a modular building, you have a digital passport. So you know everything that goes into that module. So if you're adding 2 bedrooms to the back of your house, if in 20 years' time you want to move that module, we know every component and piece of material that has gone into it, and then we can move that material very efficiently. Likewise, cars. CO2 emissions, from a company aspect, you will be penalized for the amount of emissions that you are emitting, whether that's in waste, whether it's energy or raw materials. I'm particularly passionate about waste because there's huge opportunities for everyone here in around waste, whether that's food waste or e-waste or whether that's agri-waste. Okay, so just at a very, and I touched on this, at a very broad view of this, across all sectors, agri-food, pharma, because I know you're from different sectors here, ICT, plastics, construction and buildings, there's lots of opportunities right across these. So all of these organizations are looking at and creating sustainability strategies. Now, from a sales aspect, it's one of the things we'll talk about later, but your pathway and your value proposition, your USP, when you're selling, consumer behaviors are changing, like me, for example, and really, you really want to lean into this sustainability and circular piece and around if you're reducing plastics, if you are reducing your water content in your whole process, or packaging indeed. Okay, so just at a very high level, if you're in food, for example, innovation opportunities in Ireland, over 100 million tonnes of materials are used annually, and 5% of material improvement could yield 2.32 billion per annum for the Irish economy. Now, that's uncapitalized. So when you look at currently how your sales process is working, when I work with companies, we're looking at the untapped potential. So as a sales individual or a growth opportunity from a strategy aspect, it's really important to connect back into your circular or your sustainability strategy. And if you don't have one, it's time to create one, or to look at creating one or building one into your overall strategy. So just some of the opportunities. Now, I am alluding here to both circular and bioeconomy. And as I said, the bioeconomy is about bio-based products. So this framework that I use is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I work under different levels. So when we're regenerating, or when we're looking in the sharing economy, for example, sharing assets is around sharing cars, rooms, appliances. So as you know, Airbnb is a sharing economy. Cars, you have Go Cars, which was is an Irish example. But there's a real shortage of even leasing cars in Ireland. I don't know about you. I don't necessarily want to own my car. I don't want to own, as I've said, a lot of my technology. I'd like to lease it. And we really are heading more in that direction. Reusing, we see a lot of new renting reusable clothes in the fashion industry. Prolonging life through maintenance. This is really going to bring back the whole service industry, and this is where we're headed. So this is how you can leverage your value proposition as well, and designing for durability. So a lot of what I do is in around the design phase. Now, there are a lot of accelerator out there, and unfortunately, when they're building their business models, they're still building linear business models. So 90% of our business models, unfortunately, are linear, and policy and regulations are going to mandate that they change the circular. So if you are looking at business models, I really suggest a circular approach, meaning that at the very beginning of your life cycle, you're designing for your end of waste. You're thinking about your waste, whether that's in technology or in pharma or in food. You're thinking about, well, if I'm in technology, are we actually selling this product? Could we sell this product as a service, or could we lease this product? Optimizing is in around removing waste in production and your supply chain. We're always looking at our supply chain in the circular economy and who's in our supply chain, and our suppliers' strategy, circular strategy that they have when we're partnering with them. A circular economy is all leveraging big data, automation. So even, for example, in agri and food, a lot of the sensors in our biorefineries, and when I'm building biorefineries, are driven by data and driven by technology and driven by AI. Remote sensing is used in all our agri productions. Looping, for example, remanufacturing products or components and recycling materials. So, for example, we've some great examples in the optimizing with Food Cloud there on the right. I have some Irish examples. Green Generation is a biorefinery, an anaerobic biorefinery in Kildare, recently taken over by Clonbio in Hungary, a really large anaerobic digester making renewable energy and byproducts. Virtualize is music travel, as we know, and exchange is about replacing old with new. So, for example, Philips is a good example. So Philips sell now lighting as a service. In the construction industry, we're looking at, to reduce materials, we're looking at 3D printing and smart technologies. Okay, so just some challenges at a very high level. Consumer demand. To date, there's been a lack of appetite to pay more for circular products, but that is changing because of COVID, local versus global, and consumers are really looking at where their products are coming from. So that's really from a sales aspect and a growth aspect. You need to think about that. Where is your consumer at with the product you're selling? There's this whole piece around the convenience culture, same-day delivery, fast fashion, single use. However, that now too is changing, and that's going to be driven by policy and regulations. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. Circular Economy Bill was mandated in 2021, which has a huge impact on all of this. Investment pressure. Can investors get higher return of investments? I'm a part of HBAN and EBAN, and Europeans weren't great investing in, say, for example, the circular economy or the bioeconomy to date. North Americans have been investing heavily in new business in this area, but this is changing because they are getting a higher return of investment, and that policy and regulations are mandating this. So supplies, to date, one of our challenge from a supply aspect were the costs. Virgin raw materials were cheaper, meaning if we're building our plastics, it's cheaper to get virgin materials rather than reusing the plastics. That too now is changing through policy and regulation. Culture, consumer behaviors, and a lack of circular business models. And that now too is changing. So if, for example, you are designing that business model, or you're running accelerators, or within even TU, to think about really looking at the circular and dematerialization at a very early stage. An innovative business model is required to make circularity economic, and it is becoming much more so. So the gaps, and this is where there's opportunity for us all really, and it's really exciting. So the gaps currently generate sufficient volume of pure secondary material and material substitutes. Infrastructure, we're talking about enabling infrastructure markets to aggregate waste byproducts, which means that when I'm working with companies and they have a linear model, we look at saying, how can we take your waste and look at that as a new revenue stream? Data, producing material information, enabling recovery for reuse. So in the construction industry, we look at digital product passports. That means that. So if you're building your house, you're building a module, or you're building new roads or new infrastructure, then everything is run through from a database aspect, and it's managed at design stage, so that if we want to disassemble it, we know exactly what materials have gone in, what kind of materials, and what we do with that waste. As in, it won't be going to landfill if we can use it as backfill waste or reuse it. Standardization, developing a national level in the waste strategy, which is done, which the EPA and the Irish government have in place now. Education is a big piece. There certainly is a lack of awareness and understanding of the circular economy, bioeconomy, and people don't necessarily understand the terminology because it gets mixed up with all the climate terminology, but there's huge scope for education, skills awareness, and capacity building around this, especially for TU, who does such a fantastic job across the board at education awareness. And even in the construction industry, a lot of gaps. It's very fragmented in the construction industry. A lot of opportunity there for training and development. Creating policy coherence and aligning regulations, and that's happening now as well. Funding, a lot of funding. I do a lot of work from a European aspect with accessing funding for SMEs and R&D. A lot of Green Deal funding, a lot of just transition funding. One of the challenges is that we don't have a problem with the funding. Sometimes in Ireland, we have a lot of agencies and accessing the funding takes time, which is something I'm looking at from a government aspect with the government departments on that. And designing, and I'll probably say this a few times because it's something that I'm really passionate about, is that you need to design for circularity early in the projects. 80% of design is locked in, environment impact is locked in at design stage. So if you build a linear model and you come back at the end, you say, what do we do with our waste now? It's much more expensive. So this is the part I call navigating the ecosystem. So here we have our circular business model here in the middle. So you've created your business model. You're looking for opportunities, new growth opportunities, sales opportunities. So first we look at just that bubble on environmental trends. Where you want to lean into with your value proposition is there's changing consumer behaviors. So you want to say, how are you selling your product aligned to your sustainability strategy and aligned to your circular strategy? Are you selling tech? Are you selling pharma? And where are your growth opportunities? And we know from all the research we have, there are changing consumer behaviors and it's changing very quickly. And there's environmental and societal drivers, as in companies are going to be penalized for their end of waste cycle, and circular companies are really going to be rewarded. There's new markets, there's new types of investors, a lot of money, private investment being matched by public money. So there's new types of investors out there as well. And there's this whole piece of, if you are in the circular economy, moving into that sustainability piece, regional clusters. It's not just about urban development, it's about that whole regional piece and creating jobs and creating those market in clusters. And then local versus global. We know from a COVID aspect on our supply chain, we really look at supply chains on an ongoing basis throughout our circular pathways. And from COVID, we really don't want to be, we see the delay there has been on the supply chain from a global aspect throughout COVID. So we can find alternatives locally, then that's really the way we want to go. And especially from a transport and the cost aspect as well. And even if you look at from I was with the ESB this morning and we're doing a circularity project. Even the cost of building, if you can take the waste that you have and rather than paying for all that waste to go to landfill, you can reuse that. Remember, you're saving as a company as well. If we look at even from industry forces, primary producers, entrepreneurs, technology, data-driven platforms, huge opportunity in this area and around how we can look at local primary producers, look at those bio-based rather than fossil-based sources. And then our entrepreneurs, new ideas, new emerging trends that are happening, and there's quite a number of them, and it's really exciting. And remember, if you're a large organization, if you think, we're doing really well, there's a lot of young emerging companies coming into the space from circularity aspect. So you really need to be seeing and looking at what those emerging companies are doing and their new value propositions aligned to circularity and that new consumer. From a political aspect, we're looking at the governments are going to be heavily penalized around GHG gases, CO2 emissions, and that's all ramping up because we're way behind from an Irish aspect. You'll see from COVID what's happened, and even Brexit. The legislation has kicked in 2021. Circular economy bill has been implemented, and more regulations and policies are coming down from a waste directive from Europe, and there's the management of all of our carbon footprint. So the drivers then, and I've alluded to these. So if you have a business model, just from an innovation aspect, we look at the circular inputs, and we look at circular supply. So for example, Vision built, Sisk bought this fabulous company out, and they do modular buildings. IKEA are circular, claim to be circular by 2025, and are doing great work around taking back, looking at their supply chains, looking at their suppliers. Resource recovery is a big one, like iPhone, for example, or an Apple. How do we take our Apple Macs back? How do we deassemble them? How do we take out the gold and the different materials that are in them? So in all our drawers, currently, wherever you are now, you probably have a lot of technology in there. They're very valuable resources in all of our technology that's sitting on our desks. The whole industry of reselling, repairing, reusing is all those business models are really just growing. When we're building and we're designing, we're always looking at product life extension. So when we're building that Apple Mac, or we're building that Siemens fridge or washing machine, or that new server, then really looking at extending that life is really what we're looking at from a design aspect. Sharing platforms, I've alluded to that, GoCar, and creating product as a service, and Philips are a good example on that. So emerging circular business models involve technology, lean, that whole iterative approach. The whole environment needs to come into this, what we call environment, social and governance aspects, which is ESGs. Data-driven, all data-driven, and looking at the whole AI and how technology drives our circular business model. Okay, just from an e-waste problem, if you are in technology, a lot of e-waste, it's going to landfill, and our landfills are full, and it's a problem. And companies will be penalized for this. So just to give you an idea of the e-waste problem, 2019, 53.6 million tons of e-waste produced globally, increased 21% in 5 years. That's almost 50 million pieces of electrical goods are discarded per year. Less than 20% are recycled. 57 billion in gold and other components discarded. That's materials, and they're going to landfill, and that can't continue, because that's a staggering amount of e-waste. However, though, there's a lot of opportunities from these resources, and they can be recycled, they can be reused, they can be disassembled. Just very quickly on the policies and the regulations from a company aspect, because you can leverage from this from a sales aspect and from a growth opportunity aspect. So consumption of biomass, fossil fuels, metals and minerals are expected to double in 40 years, while annual waste generation is projected to increase 70%. So that's 50% of total GHG emissions and more than 90% of biodiversity loss. So if you're a company and you have your sustainability strategy, you're really looking at to lean into this from your value proposition. And the key part here is that in 2021, the circular economy bill, it's on a statutory footing, which means that if you're a director, no longer can you say, that's my contractor's, I don't know what my contractor does with my waste, you're responsible. So hence, therefore, your board will be much more, will have to report on the amount of waste, where you're sending that waste, and how that's discarded. So you will be penalized. But there's opportunity in this as well. So what the European Circular Economy Action Plan is stating is looking at measures and opportunities to make sustainable products the norm and circular, empowering consumers and public buyers. Look at your whole procurement strategy and who you're buying from, and using that as a growth strategy as well as an opportunity for you. Focus on sectors using the most resources, for example, I've just put this in here because I know we have a wide range in our audience: electronics, ICT, packaging, plastics, textiles, the fashion industry, construction and building, huge emitter of waste, food, water, and nutrients. So the key here is that as organizations, you need to think about ensuring less waste and making circularity work for people, regions, and cities. And this leads global effort from a circular economy aspect. So let's just look at some case studies. So Google, just watching time here, Google, 22% of machine upgrades components were refurbished. 36% of servers were remanufactured. So this is 2016. I can't find their most recent numbers, but I must do that. So Google have found new uses for materials. So as companies, as technology companies and pharma companies for those waste, this is what you need to be looking at for new opportunities and a sales aspect as well. So 80% landfill diversion rate globally for their data centers, with 6 of 14 data centers reaching 100% diversion. And these are figures your companies are going to have to report back. How much are you rediverting? How much are you using? And where's your material separation happening? And really, it's hard to do this at the end of life cycle. That's why we have to design this in the beginning. Google worked very closely with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is the Circular Economy Foundation based in the UK. Just giving you some data there, they've diverted 78% from waste and landfill. And they aim to build 100% of consumer electronics launching in 2022. I just want to show you this very briefly. Just an example from Apple. And so what that means is Daisy Robot is, for every 100,000 phones taken back, Daisy can potentially recover this amount: aluminium, copper, cobalt, steel. These are really valuable resources sitting in our desks. I gave the example earlier from Philips using light as a service. Prior to this, they sold you the lights, whereas now they sell this, their business model is lighting as a service. So just at a very high level, and we will finish up in a few minutes, thinking about the design is at the heart of the circular of the business, circular and bioeconomy. So we need to design our products and business model cities and convert the linear systems. So as a designer, the role of designers in creating a circular economy, it's a 4-stage process here, a circular design process, and we have 6 strategies for incorporating the circular design principles into your designs. So I put this in here because this has an impact on how you're selling and thinking about your growth strategies. So we know the shift in design is circular. So design is the key to the first principle of the circular economy, which is design out waste and pollution. So unfortunately, most things are designed for the linear economy. So we need to do a lot of designing in construction industry, technology industry, and in the food industry. So the process is similar to the existing process. You know, you understand, get to know your users and the systems, you define what you're doing, you make, you ideate, design, and create your prototype, and you release. So it's still a very iterative process, that design process. You're constantly testing and refining to understand how users interact with your design and how it fits within the wider system. So just a poll here very quickly. I know it's late in the evening. Aoife, you might just put up that poll for us, that first poll. So which of the following is not one of the 3 principles of the circular economy, do you think? So we'll just
slow responses.
That's
One
okay.
person.
That's all right. It's late in the evening. Okay, perfect. So we're just going to take that off there, if that's fine. Okay, yeah. Connected. Yeah, design for, just stop sharing that there if you don't mind. So yes, design for endless recycling. So we're not designing for endless recycling because that's the outer end of our loop. Really, we want to keep products and materials in use. We want to regenerate natural systems, design our waste. Great. Okay, so strategies for circular design: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate. Okay, so this is key to your sales strategy and to your strategy. Is ownership really necessary of your product? So we know that central is a shift from ownership to access. Customers don't need to own that product. I don't need to own my Apple Mac or my fridge. I require access to that product, sometimes for a short period of time, like a car, maybe, for example, and you can return it. Or maybe in the summertime, we all don't need to own our garden equipment. So new business models are offering products on a short-term basis through rental, subscription, sharing, and leasing. So this is part of your sales strategy and thinking about that, and your growth strategy. Product life extension is another one, designing products that last. So if it's, for example, your technology, or if you're in pharma or in the food business, extending the life, or the construction business, better example, extending the life of a product, allowing it to remain in use for as long as possible. So design products to be both physically and emotionally durable, or allow the product to adapt to the user's changing needs. I've given kind of an example here. I should have given the construction one. So products that resist damage or wear, retain their emotional appeal, or are able to be reused multiple times by many different users. So for example, this one here is it's called Petit Pli. It's clothes from a fashion industry that grows with the child. So the material is stretchable. So another question, which of the following approaches create the highest value, do you think? Do you want to pop that up there? Aoife?
Sorry, Mary, we're just
That's okay.
grabbing it. Okay, there we go. Okay,
perfect. Okay, so we have 67% reuse and 33%. That's interesting. Okay, I'm just gonna put that out there. Perfect. Okay, so it's reuse, and that's because it's great. I'll take that off. Both recycling and remanufacturing are important to recover and retain, but really designing products so they may be reused ensures that the materials remain in use for as long as possible. Okay, generating the maximum value. So your business models will move in this direction, and your revenue, thinking about the revenue in around this, are also moving in this direction around leasing or changing to product as a service. Modularity. So this is just a good example. Vision Build, for example, designing for upgradability and easy repair. So modular design makes products easier to repair, remanufacture, and upgrade and disassemble, lowering the cost and effort to swap out damaged components. So we have, for example, Fairphones, the modular design phone, or even your modular designed houses. So modular systems are simpler to customize and adapt, preventing products from becoming obsolete, thus keeping them in use for as long as possible. Okay, so last poll here. What percentage of a product environmental impact is locked in at design stage? We're near the end here, do you think? Great. Okay, I think this is a great poll, actually. I think it's 80%. It's 80% is locked in at design stage. So that's why when we're designing, especially earlier stage, when we're working with earlier stage companies, to really think about circular business models as opposed to linear. Okay, so that's it for me. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. There's a lot of opportunity in this area. Oh, hi, Justine. Do you want to put your mic on, Justine? Or do you want to ask the question? You can pop it in the chat, I don't mind.
Maybe just put it in the chat.
Perfect.
Q&A coming through.
I'll type. I think you've a few questions as well.
Yes, I do. Maybe I'll pose one of those to you, Mary, while Justine is putting together her thoughts. So something that came in from beforehand was, how can we leverage the circular economy as a competitive economy for our organization?
Okay, so how do we leverage as a competitive advantage? So it's really, I guess, where we start here is, what's our sustainability strategy? So if we're looking at, if you're selling and you're looking for growth opportunities, from a sales aspect, we've got to look at what's our sustainability strategy and how are we moving in that direction. So it's a real competitive advantage if we have a circular strategy, we have a sustainability strategy, like the likes of Logitech and Cisc have currently very detailed sustainability strategies. And it's really, when you're selling to the new consumer, they're asking, look, what is your sustainability strategy? So it's competitive advantage, one. Two is resilience to price volatility and that whole supply chain shocks. So really, we're looking at there, like I said earlier, local versus global. And really saying, look, how can we look at our suppliers in our value chain and say, what kind of materials, what's our alternative materials can we source locally as opposed to globally? And how can we prevent, as you can see, huge price increases on fossil-based products, materials? Can we look at bio-based materials? And it takes a long time, or takes quite a bit of time to get those into the supply chain. So it's really about creating your own sustainability strategy early on and saying, what does our circular, sustainable business model look like? And how can we look at our waste and get new revenue streams from that and sell with that as part of our value proposition?
Okay, great. I see
Justine, we might take Justine's one. How should SMEs implement circular economy thinking in the absence of dedicated resource? A really great question, Justine. So in the absence of dedicated resources, so I have one, I'm just going to pop that down there. I have pathways environment. Let me just show you this. So when this is where actually there's a role for, I think, TU Dublin, because you do a great job as regards, bringing industry people with applied knowledge. And when they don't have, they could work with, say, the likes of you guys, or work with even that whole education piece and around this. So when I talk to companies around moving from linear to circular, we look at the strategy development. We document the full life cycle before deciding what the journey is. We document that business model, the existing business model, what the circular business model will look like, and what are the opportunities, challenges, and barriers, kind of similar to what we went through earlier, and then developing that strategy. But the difference, Justine, is that we're really developing the strategy, and thinking about very early in the life cycle, where are our materials here? Who are our suppliers? Where's procurement? How are we operating? What's our operation strategy? And what's our sales process like here? One of the things you've asked from an SME aspect is, if they don't have people to do this within the company, EPA, a lot of funding in this area to move us from linear to circular. So there are opportunities for companies to leverage off those funds, and say consultants can come in. I work with Circular and a part of the NSAI developing all of this strategy. And certainly there's earlier stage, this consultancy schemes there as well that you can move. SMEs can get. But part of that pathway is defining the outcomes, understanding your stakeholders, redesigning your business model. But if you have a linear model for 30 years, you're not just going to rebuild your business model. You really have to break it into components and say, where can we leverage first of all? What are our opportunities? How can we upsell here? How can we look at that waste? And then it has to be part of a life cycle analysis, determining the metrics, the measurements, and the tools. So remember earlier what I said on the policy and the regulations. If you're a director, Justine, for example, in an SME, you will need to be telling on your metrics, the government as regards how much waste you have, how much is going to landfill, what kind of materials are in that waste, how are you disposing of that waste, and you'll be penalised if it's all going to landfill. So you need to think about what metrics tools you're using. And similar to lean and lean construction and circular, we iterate all of the time. And design is never ending. So design thinking is dated really from that linear aspect. Really, you're really looking at a circular design aspect, really bringing it back to that very early stage product design and materials and understanding your materials. And understanding your data as well, what's going into the cloud. So I think at our last session, Aoife, somebody asked the question, but we're a technology company, what does it matter to us? It matters. It matters how much data you have, how much water and energy efficiencies in your building, how much smart technology you have in your building, and thinking about if you have a data center, for example, what kind of energy uses do you have? So it's the whole smart technology in the construction industry, when I'm working with the likes of CISC and larger organizations, is around looking at those resources. So I hope I answered your question, Justine. And you know what I've just said here, actually, just in the blue, start at the design stage. I can't state that enough. Designing for material reuse and end of life, thinking upstream all the time and across the value chain. Then by the time you get to sales and your growth opportunities, you're selling this to your consumers. You're selling the whole piece around, CISC is selling, they're saying, look, and Kingspan, for example, is selling and their whole supply chain. We're only dealing with suppliers who are thinking about circularity. We're looking at local suppliers. We've swapped out our fossil materials for bio-based materials. We're actually taking all of our food waste. If you look at Frylight, I think they might even be in some of your programs. So if you look at Frylight, and they're selling their whole business model on circularity, a really interesting example on how they reuse their byproducts, what they're reusing it, how they're recycling it, their whole supplier chain, and they're selling on that. They've a great case study, actually. Okay, is there another question there?
Question in the chat from Colin. So what are the key barriers to more circularity?
Key barriers. Okay, so a number of that, I think we had a slide on that one there. So barriers are in around policy and regulation is one. So we were really waiting on that circular economy bill, the waste directive, and really awareness and education is a barrier for companies. You might have noticed, Colin, over the last 6-9 months, huge number of jobs looking for sustainability directors. They're calling them sustainability directors. And this is really being driven by companies saying, jeepers, we don't know too much about what we need to do to change our business model. If you look at the construction industry, really it's very fragmented, and really it's too late by the time it's got to the builders, as in a lot of the waste just being chucked into landfill. But we need to come back up that supply chain and educate all of those people in around what it means at the end of that business model, or for companies. And the next part is in around the gap in the skills gap, the green skills gap for apprentices, for capabilities within organizations to think about the whole sustainability piece. And then there's material passports and dematerialization in around that part around how fossil fuel companies have been incentivized because they're big brands, and policy works their way. And that's not the case for our bio-based. So I work in building bio-based refineries and bioenergy. It's changing though. So 5 years ago, their business models, I would say, we're not making too much money, but that's actually changing now. But you'll find a rapid change in those barriers in the next, even within the next year, because our policy, because we need to accelerate to get to zero carbon, and we're going to be penalized as a country in doing that. So it's a lot of change is going to happen. But I guess, Colin, from your aspect and the TU aspect and from a sales aspect, this is really kind of good news. It's good news from the aspect that, you know, when you look at your sales strategy, you're selling upstream, when you're looking at all of your product development, really looking at circularity and sustainability, because that's what your clients and your companies are going to look for, as opposed to linear. I still am seeing too many early stage companies and maybe consultants selling linear business models or doing linear business models, and it's a real shame. So that's where we really need to do, from an education aspect, really get in there on that gap piece, that green skills. Hope that answered your question.
Mary, just wonder, and maybe you've alluded to some of this with some of the questions that you've answered already, but there was a question in from an attendee in advance, and wondering about the pathways to transitioning, from linear to circular. And I know you talked about like resourcing and funding that's available, but what else should an audience be considering?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the key things is to go back to is that whole piece around thinking about, you know, your strategy, and thinking about, you know, go back and look at, well, what's our plan here for this under my different headings. And even I'm working with ESB and around their waste strategy, their backfill waste. So for example, you know, they do a lot of building actually, and currently, you know, a lot of their backfill waste is going to landfill. But now looking at that piece of work of backfill and waste within the likes of ESB and pulling that back into their strategy development. And organizations aren't thinking about the circularity within their strategy. So when you're doing strategy on your product development or on your business courses, that component of circularity and sustainability absolutely has to be in there, in your innovation, in your product design. And actually, I did a paper last year just on the whole funding piece and access to funding. There's a lot of funding available in Ireland for moving companies from linear to circular. And to think about that, we've a messy kind of, we've too many agencies giving too small pots of funding to build in big infrastructure projects, but it's there. And interestingly enough, I know I've said this to you, Aoife, I was speaking at a conference in France last week in around environmental systems and integration and funding from those from a European aspect. And a big part of this is around collaboration. And I know you're good in TU around collaborating. And I guess a lot of the work that I'm doing in the last couple of years in around collaborating with actors and stakeholders. So for example, I work out of the Energy Institute in UCD. I run an accelerator in around decarbonisation and circular economy in UCD, but we're collaborating with partners in, you know, the ESB and industry partners, and collaborating with government. And I know you do a lot of that work yourselves within product design and your innovation programs. So collaboration and partnering, we have to scale at a much faster rate. Companies can't do this on their own. So that collaborative piece is really important. And one of the reasons that I did this industry keynote, that it's important for me to do this, is thinking about how we find other collaborators in Europe. So when we want to scale our projects, or even looking for projects from Horizon 2020, and looking at areas around your supply chain and influence of customers and supplier behaviors there. So that's really that pathways piece.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the floor?
It's actually it's a fantastic area to be in and to work in. And, you know, I guess, It's not anything new, really. I mean, I come from a biosystems engineering background, so I'm really interested in materialization and dematerialization. But, you know, if you think back 30 years or 25 years, you know, things were repaired and things were recycled and things were built to last. Whereas our companies decided strategically to do away with that business model and make, and dispose. Whereas now we're going back to recycling, and we're going to go back at an accelerated speed to that circular model, and even circular fashion and renting clothes. I recently did a talk for a group of CEOs and CFOs, and one CFO from pharma says, well, you know, we're doing great actually from a pharma aspect, and, you know, our product is really going well. What difference does it really make to me? And the difference, what it means to them as a pharma company, is in around patents, and how younger companies are coming in and from a circularity aspect are looking at their water usage, their waste usage. And our pharma company might have been in business for X number of years, and that is great, but they also need to look at who's who's coming up along the chain, the line, and going to eat their lunch as well. A lot of really interesting, new, innovative circular companies out there.
Okay, so lots of food for thought.
Yeah, it is food for thought, but it's good. A lot of opportunity from sales and a lot of opportunity from growth and strategy aspect, and we've some great case studies. Think upstream.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Okay, well, if there are no other questions from the floor, we might. I
hope you found that useful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Karen.
Mary,
yes,
it was really insightful, and as I said, a lot of food for thought and good opportunities from what's the differentiator, which is exciting. So
yeah, for sure.
And yeah, thank you very much for your support, and to everybody who's here with us, thank you for your support. Thanks for being with us this evening. We will make this recording available should you wish to reference back to it in the future as you start working on your strategies. And for now, I just wish you a very good evening, and we will talk to you all again soon.
Thank you, Ethan. It's always a pleasure to work with you and to you, Dublin. So thank you.
Thank you.